Today on Freelance Kills, I'm going to be bringing on a guest, my first guest on the show, so I'm super excited about that. This guest today happens to be one of my best friends. I've known him for, I guess it's been almost a decade, probably a whole 10 years. This is my friend, Sean Hotchkiss. He is a writer living in Los Angeles. You can read his articles and essays on mental health and modern masculinity as they've appeared in GQ, Esquire, the Wall Street Journal, and several other publications. My friend grew up in Maine, and we both met in New York City, both changing the directions of our lives in terms of career. And we grew a friendship out of that and had several experiences, several fun times, bad times, all that kind of stuff together. But the main thing is that we've had money journeys that we shared together along the way. And I thought it would be very interesting to have him jump on the show and talk a little bit about his journey. So without further ado, I bring you Sean Hotchkiss. Welcome to Freelance Kills, man. I'm glad you could make it on here.
Me too, man. What a pleasure.
It was a matter of time, really.
I appreciate you thinking of me.
Yeah, of course, dude. Anyway, I'll probably set up the episode beforehand, so I don't want to spend too much time being like, this is my best friend Sean, blah blah blah. I'll do that later. But I do want to jump. Let's just jump right into it, man. Like, first of all, tell everybody what do you do for a living? How do you even make money? What is your story? Your small little story here.
Well, it's changed a lot, especially the last few years. But I've kind of been going through a bit of a transition. But the ways I make a living now are through a counseling and coaching business. I work primarily with men, and coaching I like to tell people it's a little bit different than therapy because it's focused much more on present challenges and future goals than it is on the past. Of course, right. As you know, when you set out to achieve goals, inevitably barriers will come up. So obviously we will spend some time talking through the past because that's obviously, that's become a big interest of mine. I have a lot of experience with being a patient in therapy and being in workshops and being on the receiving end of coaching. So, but anyway, yeah. So I do coaching and counseling, and then for the last 10-ish years, I've also been a writer. Made my living primarily through magazine journalism, but more recently, I've been writing a lot of autobiographical stuff.
That's awesome. I feel like, and obviously nobody that doesn't know you listening to this won't understand sort of the trajectory you've been through. But I feel like having known you for a better part of a decade, that this is sort of a great part of your journey, especially this season compared to the rest.
Yeah. In many ways, I feel like I'm finally coming out of hiding or something. It's
very fair.
This is my debut.
Yeah, welcome back. So jumping into this, I kind of was thinking about, okay, what are some questions that will seem interesting to me? What are some questions that will seem interesting to the audience? And I always, in the spirit of keeping things very simple, I wanted to start off by just asking you, what does money even mean to you? Like, how would you define that word money?
I think, money to me is some sort of an energetic exchange between people for services. And, I think so much of, how we define money really comes from how we grew up, the people around us, how they defined it, how they thought, it contributed to their lives. And then of course the society we live in too,
Right. Yeah. When do you think you started developing your relationship with money, as a kid or whenever that started?
I had a really interesting relationship. Well, I guess I should say, Yeah, but money was very prevalent as an idea and a concept in my childhood, because I had two really different experiences growing up. My biological parents got divorced when I was 5, and my mom, who was then a single mom and like going back to school and just kind of getting by, she was really struggling financially, and money was very tight in that household. We lived in small apartments together, often just like a 1-bedroom apartment, and my mom would give me the room and she would be sleeping in the living room. So
Yeah.
it was very much like she made it very clear to me at a young age that we didn't have a lot of money, but she what she did have, we had a lot of fun with it. The other side of the equation was my dad was someone who really loved money. Like he wanted to have a lot of money. It was really important to him. And he remarried the woman who had become my stepmother, and she came from a lot of money. She had a lot of family money. She was from the Midwest, and her grandfather had been a really successful insurance guy, and so they had family money, and she had a trust fund, and my dad got very used to that lifestyle and really like he really aspired to that lifestyle and then really got to live it for a while. And for me, like being a little kid, like going back and forth from these houses, right? Like it'd be like me in a little apartment with my mom, like living above a drug dealer, and then I'd go like get shipped up to the country club on the weekends, like to go be with my dad and my stepmother. So I had this like kind of crazy I had different ends of the spectrum.
Right. I mean, it sounds very polar.
It was super polarizing. And I'm not gonna lie, as like a little kid, you start seeing, oh well, on this at this house, like we can't necessarily get all the things we want for Christmas, and at this house we get to go on vacation in all these places. So it's like you start thinking like, oh, maybe it's maybe it's really cool to have money,
Right. Right.
um my dad and my stepmother lived in a community that was like a very affluent community. And so the prevailing opinion in that community was also like having money is a good thing.
Right. Was there a point in time throughout that sort of journey with both your parents, your stepmother and your dad, your actual mother, your biological mother? Was there a chance? Was there a time in that period where you started identifying with more over the other, or were you constantly sort of back and forth with trying to figure out what's actually the right way to be?
I think I was back and forth with it. The other interesting piece to this for me is like I always like I was so close with my mom growing up, and we were just like, we just spent so much time together, and I felt so comfortable around her. And she was very transparent with me. Like, I gave the example of her. I remember this like sitting outside a store with her once. Like I think we were down at the outlets in Kittery, Maine, and we were sitting outside. I think it was like the Tommy Hilfiger store or something. I was like gonna go school shopping or something, and she was always really transparent with me. She was like, hey, I have $100 to spend. I can't go over that. That's what you can spend in here, blah blah blah,
Yeah.
and then up in my dad's house, I always felt like there was this I always felt like I was having to like try to measure up to something that I didn't always feel comfortable with. Like I always felt like maybe I had to try to be something I wasn't to like fit in,
Right.
in that world. And also there was lots of spending going on, but often with a lot of guilt attached to it. So it's
Mm,
like at my dad's house, we had the funds, like my stepmother had the funds, but yet there was a guilt attached to the money. So it was like down at my mom's, it was like, yeah, we don't have any money, but like we can spend it and have fun. And then up at my dad's, it was like, yeah, well, I mean, you should be grateful for this because you don't know if this is going to happen again, like that kind of attitude, when clearly it was going to happen again.
yeah.
You
Very
know?
true. I mean, I know you and me privately have talked about this word scarcity, and I know that's something that's affected your adult life. Do you think that is am I touching on the right point in time where scarcity is introduced, or did that come later on in your relationship with money?
I think scarcity was there always for me, and I think that both those examples I just gave are kind of they're really leading to a scarcity mindset. Like even my mom being like, hey, we really don't have money, or my dad being like, well, yeah, but we'll spend it this time, but I don't know if we're going to be able to spend. Both of those are like kind of more fear-based,
Right.
scarcity-based ideas, right?
All
And
very related.
yeah, and my mom grew up in a family that had money. Her dad was like a successful executive at the energy company, and she went to private school, and that's actually where she met my dad. But my dad was like the poor kid that was the townie, and his mom worked in the library, so he got to go to the fancy school.
Nice.
Um, so they came from different places, but kind of crisscrossed. My mom, because she had a challenging childhood. She actually kind of turned away from money. Like she almost, I like this is something my mom and I have talked about actually. But she's willing to acknowledge that she almost took this vow of poverty because she was like, when I was growing up, we had a lot of money. And look what happened to us. My parents were both alcoholics. They were violent. They were scary, and so she kind of turned her back on it. And both her and my stepfather, material things aren't very important to them.
Right.
They're more spiritual people. And, you know, I think that where we put our energy is what ends up manifesting for us, right? And they've just never put any energy into acquiring wealth. So they've never had any money. And versus my dad, he put a lot of energy into it, but it was definitely coming from that fear place, you know?
Right.
And just some background, like my dad committed suicide because he wasn't able to maintain that lifestyle. He got a divorce. My stepmother asked him for a divorce, and then he wasn't able to maintain that lifestyle anymore, and it was too overwhelming for him.
Hmm.
So it ended up being his demise, like actually money and that really the lifestyle though, and what he believed that to mean.
I've known your story for some time, and the just hearing it over again, I've you literally have experienced both ends of the extreme of how money can affect somebody's life, and it almost seems as though there's very rare times, except maybe now in your life, where there's been sort of that average experience of just go to work, get paid, save a little, spend a little, none of that sort of down the road type of thing.
It's so true. I've really just had the extremes, and it's funny because I think that how we live one area of our life can often be how we live our whole life,
Right.
and my life has been a life of extremes too. I'm actually looking for that space of which you speak, the the
It's a
balance.
hard it's funny, it's one of the harder spots to find too.
Yeah, yeah,
Usually the polar opposites are the hardest things on the treasure map, but man, sitting right in the middle and having good balance in life, that's difficult.
totally. Yeah.
In terms of this word that gets thrown around, and I don't want to use it too I hate to use a cliche, but in terms of that sort of idea of keeping up with the Joneses, is that something that you ever experienced in your life, and how did that manifest itself?
Big time. From the moment that I transferred schools, when I was in seventh grade, I left the town that I had grown up in with my mom, going to going to various different schools, but all in like lower income neighborhoods. And then I transferred. The town my dad and my stepmother were living in was it was a more affluent town with a better school. So both my parents agreed, hey, I think it'd be a better idea to send you to school there. So in seventh grade, I transferred to the new school in a town called Falmouth. And yeah, from the moment I got there, I very much experienced that. It was different. It was like the kids were different, and it was again, this idea that having money and having affluence was a good thing was very prevalent in the town, even though it was fairly, there was different socioeconomic, there was a wide range of socioeconomic conditions in that town. But the prevailing attitude was having money is a good thing anyway. So and for me, I feel like from that moment in seventh grade as a kid, like trying to fit in, it just really, for the next, God, if I was 12 then, I think for the next 15 years of my life, it only got worse from there. Keeping up with the Joneses only got worse from there, because I finished high school in Falmouth, and then I ended up going to a small private college in Western New York, where people came from a lot of money, like a lot of kids from the tri-state area, New York, Jersey, Connecticut, and a lot of affluence. And I actually ended up dating a young woman there who, came from an extremely privileged background in Connecticut and New York City growing up. And when my dad passed away, her family kind of took me in. So I feel like at that point, when I was living in Greenwich, Connecticut, and flying on private planes and, doing all these things, like I felt I had experienced almost the full spectrum of what one could experience, from little 1-bedroom apartment with my mom all the way up to the G6, so it was like that. I felt like I had seen everything at that point from a money perspective.
That's crazy. Every time I hear that story, I keep thinking, man, I can't believe he actually had a phase that went through that kind of thing. I'm curious. I want to fast forward a little bit, because I think this will still circle back to what it is to have a relationship as a bigger part of your history and experience. And tell me if this is off limits or anything, but when your father passed, I know you got a trust, and doesn't matter how much is in it or anything like that, but I'm actually curious, what is it like, or what was your experience having sort of enough money to not have to necessarily be driven to, start your life or kickstart a certain career or do anything particularly right away as an adult, versus, being able to sort of pursue, what made you tick, or maybe just pursue vices for a while? Like, sort of what role, I know this question is all over the place, but to dial it in, what role do you think having a trust passed on to you affected your maturity or your maturation through your money relationship?
Yeah, it's a great question. At the time when my dad passed away and I got that money, I remember sitting in my room. I was a senior in college at the time. I was 22. And I remember sitting in my room after getting off a call with like one of his lawyers or something, and just like falling back onto the couch and being like I better protect this money because it's all I have now, or something like that. Like I really got into like a really fear place with it right from the beginning. But, it's interesting because I'm so grateful that I had that money. That money is gone. And I'm so glad that I had it when I did, because for the first 4 or 5 years after my dad passed away, I was in so much pain that like there's no way I could have. I don't know as if I could have really, I guess put it this way, I appreciated the fact that I could have a financial cushion so that I could take care of myself and go to therapy and eventually go to rehab for a drug addiction that was, got so much worse when my dad passed away. So that money over a 14 or 15 year span gave me a lot of options in my life. It allowed me to, and I've heard you talk about this too, it's like it allowed me to play in an area and play in a group of people that I otherwise probably would not have been able to experience. Again, I was for the first few years after my dad passed, I was living with my girlfriend who came from incredible affluence, and almost overnight I had enough money to be able to at least go get a piece of that. Like I could go to Barney's and go buy a bunch of stuff, go on a shopping spree at Barney's, or I could take a vacation with her to Greece or something like that. I could buy a car. I bought a BMW, and I was 22 years old or whatever.
Yeah.
But so it gave me a lot of freedom to be able to have some, it also gave me a lot of freedom to be able to pursue whatever career I wanted to pursue, which as soon as I got back from rehab and like kind of got my head on straight a little bit, I was like, okay, I need to figure out what I want to do in the world. And I was like 26 at that point. And so that money allowed me to have the freedom to go explore. Like I got to take some fashion internships for no money and just explore. And then I got to take a job at GQ magazine for, making a very small amount, but I got to, it was my dream job. I was working at GQ at that time, so
Right.
it was, my rent of my apartment in the East Village was more than my salary, so 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 basically to quicken this a little bit, your point about not having to mature financially is especially poignant to me because I did not have to learn any good spending habits. I never had a budget. If I wanted to get, within reason, if I wanted to get this apartment or take that trip, I could do it, like you and I, we used to go travel for fun, a lot and just go to Europe. And I got to do all that because of that money that my dad left me. But it's interesting now because I don't have that money anymore. And I'm having this experience at 36 years old where I'm actually I'm having to learn these sort of more foundational aspects to finance and to personal money responsibility that I never had to learn. I've learned now. Again, I wouldn't have known this because I never had the experience, but I've learned as an adult that it is nice to have some financial stability. It really really is hard if you don't.
I couldn't agree more. I'm curious because, one of the things that I want to do with this podcast, or that I'm doing with this podcast, is I want to ask people, I want to sort of knock down some of the things that people might automatically think. This is something I'm guilty of. The minute I usually hear trust fund, especially the younger me, not now me, but when I was younger, I heard the word trust fund and I always thought, stuck up, pretentious, good school. It's just all the words that surround people with affluence, and especially kids, young adults with that kind of money. But I've come to learn and grow, and emotionally, I understand that that's not quite the truth. That there's more complexity to the story than what you would assume by making a quick snap judgment. I'm curious for you, when you think on the trust, or when you think about that question that people might ask, how could you run through so much money? Where do you, deep down, like level 2 wise, where do you think that sort of irresponsibility, and I know some of it was actually responsible growth, but and taking dream jobs that you could afford to do because of that, but in terms of the other things, where do you think that sort of irresponsibility or that emotional hole, or that you're trying to fill, where do those things sort of come from for you?
Yeah, as you were just talking, I was thinking about this concept of like the reason why most lottery winners, quickly become depressed, right? It's like or spend all the money or whatever it is. I forget the stat, but there's a really interesting thing about when you're given money and you don't have to earn it. There's a really different mindset that comes with it. I know for me, it was like I had such a strange relationship with that money. Like it never felt like mine. I always called it my dad's money. I remember the money manager who was watching out for a while, my friend Rick, I would always be like, yeah, my dad's money. And he'd be like, your dad's been dead for 10 years, Sean. It's your money. And I never, ever thought of it that way.
Right.
It did not feel like mine. And so when something is not yours and you didn't earn it, there's not a lot of skin in the game. Like, I think I was irresponsible with that money because I didn't feel connected to it. To some degree, it had such a painful connotation for me. I didn't have a problem just having a lot of experiences with it, as opposed to like being really, I more looked at it as like I can kind of like buy myself these experiences and learn from them in some way. And it wasn't so much an active thing, but it was more of an unconscious thing. I think for me, in terms of like being irresponsible and spending that money in the way I did, though, was more a result of I was in a lot of pain and I was just looking for relief. So whether that was relief through drugs, relief through excitement and activity, because I think probably the prevailing thing of my 20s was just almost an addiction to novelty. Like, hey, I'm kind of bored. Like, let's go let's go here. Let's go upstate. Let's go to Paris. Let me buy this thing that I didn't have yesterday. There was a very like ungrounded feeling, and also like a little bit of an identity thing where I didn't really know who I was, and I was kind of searching for who I was on this money journey of sorts.
Yeah, that's a great answer for that. I'm sort of reflecting on this whole conversation and your different phases. As a kid, you sort of are a ping pong ball going back and forth between different parents. One person at one extreme of not having any money, the other at the extreme of this is wealth, but it might not last till tomorrow. Then your adult years, you have sort of this untethered, ungrounded experience of being flush with cash. And now on the other side, we're both about the same age, in our mid to late 30s, having this experience of being now super grounded. The reality that what I have now, the only thing I'll have tomorrow is what I bring in myself. What do you think? What do you think you could attribute to the sobriety of your relationship now with money? Or how are you finding that balance in your life now that you've sort of ricocheted back and forth between all these walls and have landed where you have now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that the sobriety around money had to come through kind of losing that money that I had, right? Or blowing through it. Again, I like to think of it in I could get, it's easy to fall into like a negative sort of place around this and be like, oh man, like think of if I had been really responsible with it, think if I had just put that away and not touched it, like it's easy to go to that place. But dude, I had so many fun experiences with that money. Like
Yeah.
not only that, but I believe that that in a way that money was a gift from my dad, essentially to go explore myself for 15 years. And part of the reason I feel so sober around all this stuff that we're talking about right now is because in those 15 years, it may not have been pretty, but I got to know myself really well. And that money allowed me to get to know myself really well. I mean, I probably spent half of that money on therapy in some form,
Right.
or I just spent it on experiences that taught me about myself, like travel, getting to, I mean,
What they say about internships is like, or what I at least say about internships is, you do the internship to find out not what you want to do, but what you don't care to do anymore or have any interest in. And sort of spinning through that money, there's those things that teach you about yourself in terms of your travel experiences, the girls you might date, the dates you might go on, the whatever. But then there's those real things where you're in Paul Stewart or Barney's or whatever, blowing thousands of dollars on a suit, and then you walk out and a couple years later you realize, I don't think I care about all these clothes or all these types of experiences.
Absolutely. I love how you spun that. That is so true. If there's one thing about my 20s and my early 30s having access to be able to go have all these experiences, it's exactly what you said. It's having the experience of a lot of no's. Like, no, I don't think that's me. Hey, I got to try this thing that like our society says is the thing I should absolutely want. Like I should absolutely want to own a home, which is an experience I've had because of the money that I was given, right? And just understanding that that doesn't solve anything. The moment that I get the house, I don't all of a sudden feel complete. I think that there's a lot of milestones, right, in our society that we're told are supposed to complete us in some way, like finding someone that we really want to be with, or maybe buying a house or getting the dream job. Like the day after you get the dream job or you buy the house or you get with the person you want to be with, nothing is solved. It's like you're just on to another challenge. It's just, you just have one more thing, and it may be a great thing, but you just have one more thing, and now you're back to kind of the relationship with yourself.
It all flips back to self, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. Your point is such a good one. It's if we can have freedom to go have experiences, we will take yeses and nos from those. We'll be like, I don't think this really fits in with like who I am, or maybe this does fit in through who I am. Like getting the experience to to chase like a writing career, which is something I really love and have figured out through much experience that I love it, is a yes. And then the no is, yeah, going and, you know, spending my life, you know, buying $4,000 suits is not, that's not me. It doesn't feel like me. It didn't feel like me then. I just thought it was what I was supposed to want.
I'm curious, you know, one of the things peeking behind the fence or whatever, one of the things we talk about in your life is this delicate balance between, especially having afforded the ability to be 100% creative or 100% focused on the things that you want, not necessarily that you need. That balance between, you know, now that you're a writer, you want to be a creative writer, or, you know, write personal things that speak to you, but you also need to survive. And I know we've gone back and forth about what the ratio should be or how that should look in your life, but I'm wondering, over the last, you know, 1, 2, 3 years, how have you sort of found that balance, and, you know, what things have informed your decision about, you know, how to share between needs and the want of writing and surviving that way?
One thing that made a big difference for me, which was kind of trial and error thing that I picked up, is like when I was living in New York, and after I had worked in magazines and I had also worked for some brands as a copywriter, I started like a copywriting business for myself, and was doing quite a lot of it and was doing quite well. But I found that I was making a lot of money and I was really successful at it, but I wasn't getting a lot of creative fulfillment from it. So and I found that as a result of that, because it actually for a while like kind of killed my love for writing. So what I did after that experience was kind of like I had a chip on my shoulder about like wanting to go off and I sort of swung in the other direction with the pendulum, right? Like I decided, no, I'm only going to do more creative writing. Like I'm going to pursue this creative writing thing full time. And again, I liked what you said earlier about balance, because I think ideally we're all trying to get to a balance. And so now, because I spent a few years to go write a bunch of my own stories, I was getting a lot of creative fulfillment from that and have gotten a lot of creative fulfillment. So now it's easy for me to take commercial copywriting work and integrate that now, because I'm getting the creative fulfillment from the places from another place. Whereas before, when I was doing all commercial work, for instance, like I hear this a lot with photographers too. It's like photographers will be like, well, I want to be a creative photographer, but then they'll be doing 100% of like brand jobs and, you know, fashion shoots and stuff like that. And it's easy to do when you're in New York as a freelancer, because you're like, well, I'm not going to turn down a check, you know? But then someone that's doing that and is not balancing it out with personal work on the side, I think it's really easy to burn out. And that's what happened to me. So now I think about it as, okay, I have to allot some time in my schedule to be able to fulfill me, like on a deeper level, doing the creative work that I want to do. And then I have to be realistic about the fact that I need X number of jobs to be able to, it's almost paying me to go do the creative work, because the creative work isn't a guarantee of a check. I might write a whole book and it might take me 3 years, you know, on the creative side, and not get $1 for that while it was happening. And then I might, you know, I need like those regular commercial clients, retainer clients, et cetera, to pay the bills.
That's funny that you sort of put it the way that I've always thought about it, because I have a lot of people that ask me, you know, I have a great idea, how do I get somebody to sponsor it or buy in? And I keep thinking to myself, well, if you just do work, you could just pay for it yourself, you know, which isn't always the most fulfilling thing, because it requires patience and, you know, hard work before you get to before the payoff. But, you know, one of the best forms of taking care of yourself is to just do everything yourself, you know. But that actually gets me to the next question that I have for you. And I think that a lot of people that I talk to don't find that they have anything, they don't feel like they have a lot of knowledge in themselves. And I know, growing up the way I grew up, you know, even how you've described your own life, we've actually come up with a bit of street smarts. And I'm wondering, in terms of your sort of school of hard knocks journey, in terms of your money relationship, what could you teach somebody else? Like, what's something that you've learned that you think you could give on to somebody else that would help them, you know, move along their journey a little bit faster than you did?
I mean, I think the way you put it, you know, and I think what you were getting at here is so important. And it's that, you know, a lot of us try to ignore our stories and like pick up another story, or like try to pick up another identity. But like, our knowledge is our story. So everything that I just told you about the way I grew up with all these influences that were acting on me from a money perspective, those are what I have to give to someone else. So if I met a kid in his 20s that had just received like a large amount of money, for instance, and maybe he was in a lot of pain and maybe he wanted to go spend it in all the ways like most 20-year-olds would 22-year-olds would want to go spend it. Like, I mean, I could really help him, you know,
Right.
or her. So I think, yeah, my experience around, I mean, I think my experience around money is that because of my dad passing away, because of getting that money at such a young age, I got to have experiences that many people don't have until they're into their 50s or 60s or may never have at all. I got to really experience what the 0.0001% of this country and the world experiences. And so I think that I am able to give sort of a sobering perspective to what that is, because it's like it's easy to say the cliche, oh, money doesn't make you happy, but it's as we know, it's really not that simple. There are many pieces to that. It's almost at this point, as being someone who had the access to a lot of money for some time, and then going through a period of the last like year of my life where I haven't had access to the money that I would like to be able to do the things that I want. I could almost say that I relate to that even more than I ever did, because I never had to relate to it before. No, to really live the most fulfilling life that I want, I do need some stability, and I do need to create a financial foundation for myself.
That statement that money doesn't buy happiness, that's always been interesting to me, because you're right, there are layers to it, and to some extent though, money can buy you happiness. It's just probably not the form that you're actually picturing. It buys you a veneer or some sort of filter to look through, where it prevents you from looking back at yourself for some amount of time. And that sort of begs into the next area that I want to go. We've talked a little bit about emotion. We've sort of scratched the surface a little bit here, but I'm curious, like, as a coach, as somebody that has had lots of therapy themselves, how would you touch the surface on what sort of things emotionally, what kind of hangups emotionally happen that prevent us from dealing with sort of the more, I don't even know how you do money, all these sort of more topical elements that aren't necessarily core values or core things inside of us. They're sort of symptoms of the world that we have to deal with. How do dealing with the emotions help us actually engage with those other things that are just necessities for life?
And what you said about happiness, I think that, and this kind of dovetails into the my answer here to your question, but this idea of like how we define things, and how we were conditioned to relate to concepts and ideas, like, because what you just said, like, I think a lot of that really depends on how you define happiness. Yes, money can buy you things. If you believe that things are happiness, then money can buy you happiness. But if you believe that happiness is joy and like a fulfillment and a passion, I don't think money can buy you that. I think that requires like digging into yourself and figuring out who you are. I think that, to your question, like, we all have stories from growing up. Like, we inherit stories from our parents, from culture, from whatever. So the stories that we're holding on to, like, that's one thing I do a lot as a coach, is like I dig into people's stories. And a lot of stories that we have about that are like fear-based stories. It could be like, I don't deserve love, or this person, I grew up and this person hated me, or like any story that we're carrying around with us, right? The funny thing is about digging into those stories is, like, usually you dig into them and you realize that they're not even true. It's usually something we're holding on to that it may just be, it may be completely false. Like, I had this experience, I wrote a piece about it recently, with when I was growing up, I believe my stepmother hated me. She was really tough on me, and I didn't understand why. And I was a little kid, and I grew up, and all the things she represented too, because remember, she was holding all the cards in our family. She had all the money, she had the power, she had the control. So then I obviously made all these stories about myself based on that. Okay, so she's the powerful person. She hates me. So now, I'm going to go out into the world and I'm going to like prove to all these powerful people, I'm going to try to get them to like me, because then maybe that'll heal like this piece of me or whatever. So it becomes this thing, and then like 30 years later you get off the merry-go-round and you're like, oh my god, I've just been going in that direction. I just been on autopilot thinking that I have to get like the most powerful people I can find to approve of me, and then you maybe do like some work on the back end and like heal some of that stuff. And just even identifying that it's a misbelief. For me, what worked is like I went back and I started meeting with my stepmother as an adult, and I was like, oh, well, clearly she doesn't hate me. She's here meeting with me. She's opening up to me. Yeah, maybe she didn't love me the way that I wish that I could have been loved. And I heard you share about that with your mom too. Like, maybe it wasn't the idea of like what I wanted from that person, but there's a big difference between that and hatred,
Right. A huge rift.
Huge. So I think that, kind of to answer your question, like getting into some of the more emotional layers of this is really just looking at all the shades that could possibly exist between those two things. Again, between the extremes. Like I think so many of us think black and white, think extremes, and like filling in that middle area and like playing with some of those layers, and again, that is also seems to be the road to balance too.
I mean, it would seem fear really begets this departure from average or from sort of balance, because it's like you said earlier, it's like hatred and just not the type of thing that I was expecting is a totally different thing. Fear sort of accentuates those things, and that it makes things bigger than what they actually need to be. It could just be, we just don't jive. Maybe we just aren't speaking to each other the right way. But fear makes it, oh, this person wants to see the end of me. They would rather not be around me, et cetera, et cetera. I'm actually curious. This is sort of in service to people because you have a little bit more experience than I do. How does somebody, and not in a prescribed way, but just in general, how does somebody get on the path of saying, I have some weaknesses, emotional weaknesses, or I have some hangups, or I have some things I'd like to change, or I know I have some growing to do, or some introspection to do, whatever it may be. How does somebody start on that journey, knowing that at the end of that journey, or sort of not, there's no end necessarily, but knowing that part of that journey will help them get their money life right, get their relationship life correct? How does somebody even begin or start that journey?
Honestly, I think for many people, it's not really a choice. I think a lot of us reach like some sort of impasse where the only way is to kind of begin to maybe look outward and like ask for help. I know for me, like the journey began by just being in a lot of discomfort. It doesn't have to always be a lot of discomfort. I mean, a lot of people, there are a lot of entry points to looking at yourself. It could be loss of some kind. It could be the loss of a parent, or the loss of a job, or loss of a loved one, or just the loss of an identity. Like, hey, I used to, and this is happening to a lot of people right now with everything that's going on in the world. It's like, I had this whole identity about who I was. I got to go into the office every day and I got to be this person. And now I'm at home. I don't know who the hell I am anymore. And so it can be something like that for sure. The other big one is relationships, right? Like, I'm in a relationship and I want it to work out. The other person seems to want it to work out too, but for some reason we keep bumping up against this wall, right? Like, I know you've had that experience too. We both want it to work and both of us are feeling like there's something blocking us from getting this to work. So,
Right.
So let's go in and examine what that barrier is. And so I think that's the entry point. The entry point is some kind of discomfort that then you can go reach out and ask for help with. And that, in a financial sense, that could be like, I'm not where I want to be financially. Like I'm feeling every month, I'm feeling really stressed. I feel like I'm just getting by. I'm spending everything I earn, and I'm I'm emptying out that checking account every month. It could be something like that. Like, hey, I'm going to call Justin and see like what he thinks about this. I'm going to ask for help. Because that to me is the first step. You're uncomfortable and then you go ask for help. So basically you're accepting the fact that you would like some help on this.
To jump across the page to a different place, I'm curious, thinking about now that you have this sort of new place in life, this new chapter has sort of begun for you. What are some things, or one or two things maybe, that you're excited about in terms of your growth from a money side, but also even maybe career, or any other type of goal for 2021 or whatever it may be?
On the money side, I'm as scary as it's been at times to not have the cushion that I once had. I'm grateful for the opportunity that I get to really look at this for the first time. And like, because the other thing about all this stuff we're talking about, and about transformation in general, is the moment when you're actually able to begin transforming is when you're willing to look at something. When you're running away from it and not looking at it and keeping it sealed away, you're not going to change, and you're not going to grow. The growing point comes when I'm willing to actually open up my balance sheet and actually look at the numbers for the first time,
100%.
and be like, let's dive into this. And in the same way, on the emotional side, the point at which you start to grow is when you're like, I'm not going to run from my feelings anymore. Like, I'm going to go into the group and I'm going to talk about my feelings. I'm going to call up the therapist and I'm going to lay it all out there and be like, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. Can you help me? I'm really struggling in my relationship. So it's basically, it's making the things that used to be invisible visible, in the sense that you're choosing to take them out and look them in the eye. I think that's the point when transformation is able to start happening.
I skipped ahead a little too fast, and I was thinking, on your last answer, you talked briefly about, the times of right now, COVID-19, for anybody who's listening to this in the future. But it's very rare. I mean, it seems very rare. I mean, I don't know how many different pivotal moments our parents had to live with or whatever, but just in the last decade, or a little over a decade, we've both been old enough to experience what the Great Recession was all about, and now we've both lived through what would probably be a once in a lifetime event with this pandemic. And that is one of those are few and far between transformational times where an entire society, not just a couple individuals in different neighborhoods and groups, but an entire society, if they're willing to accept that, what's happening to them, but an entire society is getting faced with, what do I do? Is my identity my work? Is my identity the thing I do on the weekends with my friends? Is my identity this hobby or this craft that I've been doing forever? And that I found, I don't really have a question behind this, but I find that to be some rich texture. I think we're going to look back at this and actually be thankful for once. I know it sucks in the moment, but there's not that many times in life where we really get to second guess. For instance, you were in real estate for a little bit. I was on Wall Street. Had there not been big fundamental issues in the world that allowed us to have an opportunity to get pushed on a little bit, I don't know if the speediness, I only spent 2 years on Wall Street. I don't know if I would have had the speediness of saying, you know what, maybe I want to do something else. I don't know. There's no question there, but if you have anything you want to riff on, feel free.
No, I love that. And I so agree with you. For those of us that are privileged enough to not be worried about where our next meal is going to come from, or, if we're going to be able to feed our families, like, this time is absolutely like a soul searching time. And I agree with you. I think we'll look back on that and be like, oh, this was a major element of like when I started to figure out sort of like what was true for me. For sure. I think for those of us that hadn't reached some kind of a breaking point already, or maybe for those of us like you and I both have experienced some transformation, evolution from old careers, also emotional work, doing deeper work, asking for help, reaching out, that kind of thing. I think for those people that maybe haven't, this was kind of like driving into a brick wall, because the modern world moves so fast, and this whole shutdown has really slowed. I mean, it's been, it's this great pause, as they're calling it. And when we're moving along really fast and the world is moving really moving really fast too. It's like we never get that separation or that mirror that hey, maybe it's time to slow down. So when the world slows down, it's like, okay, now I have to slow down, because I can speak about this from experience. I know for the first 3 weeks of quarantine, I was just trying to like bust through it. Like
Right.
I'm like I already thought I was moving slow, but like with the mirror of the completely shut down world, I was like, oh my God, I'm moving really fast here. Like I need to peel it back a little bit.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's that whole driving into a brick wall thing. It's like you kind of hobble out of the car and assess the damage and are like, okay, like what's important now? Like,
Right.
like what I'm looking around and and I think a lot of people are doing this in this moment too. It's really changing how we look at time and how present we are and how we're appreciating the small things around us. And we're lying in the bed that we made, literally, because we're in the house with the people that we chose to be in the house with, and that may be a positive thing or a tough thing for you,
Yeah, totally. It's so true. Apropos, before we move on to what I'm going to make up on the spot as the speed round, I find this interesting. If you were a normal guest, I probably wouldn't add this part. But since I know you and we have a great history, I'm wondering, do you have any questions for me in a way, that could either help you and or help anybody else that might be listening to this podcast? And don't feel on the spot. You don't have to have any. I'm just throwing them out there.
Yeah, I think. Are these finance questions or anything?
It can be anything. I mean, we have that's the beauty of what I'm trying to build here, is that obviously all these things are so interrelated. It could be relationship, career, money, I don't know, ways to relax, ways to attack creativity, whatever. But all those things all tie back into each other. So, that's one of the gifts you've given me is sort of being open to exploring all those different avenues of self. And through that, I've learned that I can't teach money. I can't help people with money without being open to talking about those other pathways that might be blocked for them, like your experience in coaching people.
Sure. Give me like between 1 and 3 solid takeaways that you've gotten from the last 7 or 8 weeks, like being in quarantine.
Oh, that's a great question, because I've been sort of toying around with this the whole time. I think in no particular order in terms of importance or anything like that, but I think that one of the biggest takeaways that I've experienced by far is that there is, if you are in a good enough position, like you said, in a fortunate enough position to not have to worry about putting food on the dinner table or keep the roof over your head. One big takeaway is that it is okay to take a pause. And I mean this not just during COVID-19, but I'm trying to keep this, I want to keep this aspect of my life open for after, when things go back to normal, is it is okay to take a pause. It is okay to just spend some time on yourself. And if that means saving up enough money to pay rent for a month, if you're a freelancer, for instance, to take a sabbatical for 30 days and just get into you, that is totally fine. Not having, I've been so laser focused on work and career for the last, I guess, 7 years since I became a freelance photographer. So I guess 7 years, hard to believe. But I've been so laser focused on building wealth and working as much as I possibly can that I realized that those couple days a month where I go to therapy or meditate or, whatever, maybe that's not enough for me. And it's okay to take a dramatic pause and just take account of, take stock in life and dig a little deeper into self. So that's one big takeaway. Second big takeaway is that money isn't everything. And I knew that going into this, but these things, they sort of, they peak and wane in terms of how you experience them in your life. Because, if I, for instance, want to go out and buy a house tomorrow and I have, half the money to get myself there, money becomes really important in the moment if I really, really feel like I need that house. But if I'm not worried so much about the house and I have enough money to stay in my apartment for the next year, then money doesn't feel so tangible anymore. It just becomes this abstract thing where I don't need to really worry about it for a little while. And so those bigger sort of money stressors fall to the back burner. And so I'm understanding that, like, I might experience these like peaks and waves and valleys of like, money is so important to me, but in the larger scale of thing, it really only is one thing, and it's an opportunity. Money is freedom. It just buys points towards freedom. And beyond that, it's really not a big deal. And I don't want to make it more of a deal than I've let it become in my life up to now. And then the third thing, or not that I'm required to do a third one, but the third thing for me, I think, has been refocusing creative energy. So, everybody that knows Freelance Kills because they knew me first, they know I'm a photographer. And so even when I'm doing, primarily brand stuff, I still do creative work on the side. And I actually get a lot of fulfillment for being creative for clients. And so in that portion of the way I've sort of pursued my career, I haven't done a lot of mixed media. And so taking this time to get back into writing, which I used to do in the back of classrooms when I had a behavior problem in math class, getting back into that, doing a little bit more of the podcast, or actually starting the podcast, relaunching my website, things like that, where they have sort of a business component to them kind of, but they really scratch the creative itch and the wanting to help people itch. Leaning into things, if they exist for you, has been an amazing thing. And if they don't, it goes back to point one, take the pause, who cares? So I think those are probably the biggest things that I've been able to take away. And there's probably some other sort of subtextual things that I've also picked up, but those have been really, really big themes for me during this time. That's a great question.
I love the first point because it really reminds me of like I love the point you made about I'm good here and now. It's only when because this idea of like the wanting mind, right, is so connected to money. Like it's like
so true.
You're like, I am so good here right now, exactly as I am, like sitting in my apartment. But the moment that I desire something, like a house, for instance, then all of a sudden my thoughts change.
Right.
Like I go from I'm doing great to, oh shit, now I'm stressed.
Right.
And yeah, if you want a house, you want a house, like it's like there's going to be some feelings that are going to come up with that. But I think that's such a good point because I think for most of us, right, again, I think most of the people that are going to be listening to this podcast, right, it's like they're not necessarily wondering where their next meal is going to come from, but it's with money, like it's good to come back to that present place of, do I have what I need today? If I'm like being responsible about everything, like let's look at the real facts of it, as opposed to this me projecting out into the future all these things that I might want, and then all of a sudden my thoughts have changed and then I'm in the fear place again.
And to be quite honest, it's like this reality of like money being able to impact your sort of your stressors or your priority levels in the back of your mind subconsciously has always been there. But I think, most of the time, especially as an educator or finance coach or whatever, I don't really have a title, but most of the time I'm talking to people that have already made the bigger mistake. So they come to me about getting out of debt, or they come to me having sat out from investing for retirement for the last 10 years or whatever. And they're like, how can I fix these things? And it's only sort of when you have some distance from the situation that you realize, like, the things that cause you to be in debt are no different than the things that will help you to get out of them. When I worry about when I'm doing really well monetarily, and I'm like, everything's taken care of, my rent's taken care of for a while, my groceries will never be a problem, I can go out and have dinner and drinks with friends, whatever, all that stuff's great. And then what we do as human beings, we add a little something. Because you got to keep it, you got to shake it up, right? I mean, living the same exact life every day with everything's just taken care of and stuff, our brains let us go ahead and start thinking, oh, you know what, now I'm in a good place, maybe I could add something. We never think, oh, maybe I could take something away, because when you're in a good place, you're not thinking subtractive or you're thinking additive. And those additive things that we do, if they're anything bigger than like, $100 or $50, whatever that big thing is relative to your income level, your sort of safety level, when we add these bigger picture things, buying a car, financing graduate school, you name it, anything with a big price tag, we add this level of something that wasn't there when things were just fine or good. And that's such a predictive formula for finding people back again in that same behavior pattern or stressor environment that they weren't in when things were just okay or fine. It's an interesting thought that we always attack it the other way, and not, from the fixing standpoint, but never from the, let me just evaluate where I'm at right now and try not to add anything that'll make it worse.
Totally. Yeah. When you're saying that, I'm just thinking about Yeah, I'm thinking about what we were talking about earlier to this, sort of an addiction or a reliance on novelty or excitement, which I so relate to. To me, when you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, like, well, we got to sprinkle a little drama on top of it. Like we got to sprinkle some excitement, like it's like you're the current situation, like I'm like, oh yeah, I got one plant, like I should probably get another one. I'll, like I'm talking to one woman, may as well make it two, like it's like, or I went, I got one jacket, but now I want this other one. It's like,
Right.
yeah, of course. Like those things are things to watch out for. It's not something to vilify ourselves for, because that, to some degree, I think this addiction to novelty is part of modern human life.
Yeah. It's an addiction to newness.
Yeah, to
Yeah.
newness. Exactly. Yeah.
Totally.
And I think that one of the great things about this time in particular with the pandemic and stuff that's going on is that people are really dialing it back through force because there's nothing to go. I mean, one of my favorite things about this whole thing, and it's probably because I have no money now, is like, even if you have lots of money right now, you can't fucking use it.
Right.
So it is like, it is leveling the playing field, which is so cool. Like I think that several things about this time are so interesting. One is the point you brought up earlier, that this is an opportunity for everybody to do some soul searching. Two, this time levels the playing field incredibly. And it's a time when everybody is just having to, like, three, really think about what's like actually important in their lives,
100%. And that is a great spot to move on to the lightning round.
Okay.
And it's nothing too hard. So I want to, since you're on the other coast, it'd be interesting to hear first question. Name one restaurant that you miss eating at since we got locked down.
Oh, that's a good one. I love this place in Highland Park called Amara Kitchen, Amara. You and I ate there.
Yeah, yeah.
And you came to visit. I love that place. I miss that place. That would be like my little treat. I'd just go out there by myself and sit there for a while and just hang out and like people watch. I love that place. I miss it.
What would be one word to describe your life in LA from a differential standpoint? So like in New York, it was this. In LA, it's now like this.
Barefoot.
That's interesting. We might need to come back on another episode and dig into what that actually means. Is there anything
literal?
Oh, it is literal. Is there anything you miss about your life in New York?
One thing that I really enjoyed about New York is the spontaneity with seeing friends. LA, just by virtue of the fact that you have to drive everywhere, has a little bit less spontaneity. I've experienced some living in a particular neighborhood where other friends live, and but New York, you can't be, you get out of work, you send the text, you're at the restaurant with your friend 15 minutes later. That doesn't happen in the same way here.
Totally. Yeah, because it's going to take you 20 minutes just to get there anyway. Next question, only two left. Next question is, what's either in a sentence or a word, can you describe your intention for the rest of this year?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think I would like to bring the magic back to my creative process. Yeah. I want to bring more of like the childlike curiosity and wonder back to my creative process. I think I got pretty rigid the last few years.
Fair. And then last question, in an adjective or two, how would you describe yourself now in this stage of your life?
I would say I'm much more compassionate to both my own experience and to others' experiences, in a way that I maybe in the past would have been more judgmental and playful. I think I feel like I've been able to get much more playful lately.
That's awesome. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that second word, so that's really cool to hear. Before we wrap up, if people want to read some of your writing or get in touch with you, follow you on social media or anything like that, let people know the best way to reach you.
My website is my name, Sean, Sean, Hotchkiss, HOTCHKISS.com. You can find, I keep it pretty up to date with all my most recent writing samples there. And there's also information about my coaching practice there and my contact information, etc. And then I do post occasional things on Instagram. My name is at Sean, SEAN_Hotchkiss. Again, HOTCHKISS.
Awesome, man. I really appreciate you taking the time to participate with this little interview process here. And it was really nice taking a deeper peek into your life. And I think a lot of people will find places in your life, maybe not the entire journey, but places where they can relate and take something away to, better their lives as well. So, I really appreciate you taking a part of it.
Yeah, man, of course. Anytime. I'm glad that I get to be on your podcast because I listen to it all the time.
Oh, awesome. Well, that's good to hear. Anyway, thanks, Hotch, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Justin. See ya.
That's it for today's show. It was such a blast being able to have both a friend and somebody with an interesting money journey on the show. If you do me a favor, if you're getting value from the show, please subscribe, like, listen, read, watch. Just get involved with us any place that you are interacting with the show. freelancekills.com. We're on Instagram at Freelance Kills, the YouTube channel. Anywhere you see us, please connect, please engage, please like, subscribe, rate. I appreciate the support, and I look forward to putting out some more great, interesting episodes.